Right. So we're in Cades Road or Cemetery Lane or whichever you like to call it here. Named, of course, after the cemetery lane relating to the cemetery, of course. It's a site here that I don't know a lot about, really, to tell you the truth. So I'm hoping some of you guys will have some information on it. But where we're standing here is a former hotel site. So there's a picture here of it. I can hand around to you. This is how it looked in the sort of the 1970s thereabouts. So it was the home of the Child family for many years. Bob and Sylvia Child lived here prior to it being a hotel. I think it was gazetted as a hotel in 1876, I think. So a very interesting site, played an important role in the development, I guess, of Yean. There were a number of hotel sites in the Yean area, so we'll talk a bit about some of those later on this afternoon perhaps. But a unique sort of, I guess, existence the hotel had. It then later became, as I say, the residence of Bob and Sylvia Childs, who then moved on further to another property down here. We'll have a look at this shortly. So, but I don't know if anybody has got any stories about this particular site.
I remember big signs up out the front. The SEC is taking our house off us. That sort of thing.
Yeah, well, that relates to when the Childs lived here. Now, Mrs. Childs, I don't know if you're familiar with Mrs. Childs, but she was a bit of a local character and an identity in the district. That particular sign, Sylvia Childs had a beef about concrete power poles when they were introducing concrete power poles to the district, and she was lobbying to get these concrete power poles to be disappeared from the landscape. But she had this sign up here on the corner here. She actually had an effigy hanging from the sign. Now, it didn't go down too well. I think there was a lady that had a son that had just recently passed away. So she went to the police station and made Sylvia have the sign pulled down. So, but that was Sylvia, that's the way she was. We'll hear a bit more about her later on this morning down here. But as I say, they lived here for many years. The property is now owned by the Fletcher family, so they reside in this newer house set back here. I was hoping Mark was going to be here this morning, but he's away. I thought he might have been able to give us a bit more information on this particular site. But yeah, so that's pretty much where it is. The land, I think, was owned by Sherwin at one point. He had a stretch of land from the river up here, and of course the railway line cuts through the middle of that pretty much. So I'll talk about that here in a minute.
Ross, I remember the house without the veranda. I just remember it seemed quite a big red brick house.
Yes, it was. I think it was a combination of brick and weatherboard, from my recall of it. But another aspect of the site, which I was just trying to get some clarification with Judy there last night about, I remember as a kid, there was a lot of cattle yards out the back here. And I think my father told me that they were built, they were going to have an opposition to the Merndersale yards here in Whittlesea, but it never really got off the ground. So I'm just not too sure who was trying to do that at the time, whether it was one of the livestock agents or what, but there was cattle yards. I don't know if they're still there somewhere, but they just were at the rear here, big sort of large cattle yards were built. So, but obviously the farm site's been the farm, remnant buildings here. Some of these, you know, I'm sure they could tell stories on their own. The construction of them, the tin, yes, yeah. So I think drums flattened out to make iron, as they did way back when you couldn't afford corrugated iron. So, but we're left with, you know, some old trees here. Of course, the oak tree, peppercorn tree, and the scum tree here, and a few footings from the hotel itself. So,
what was the use of the peppercorn trees dotted all these country areas?
Well, I think they were pretty much, they were easy to grow. They were hardy, tough, durable, shady, yeah.
Grew easy.
Yeah. So yes, Judy, you got a question?
There's also a suggestion that they were often grown where horses would be because they helped with the hot flies. So whether it's true or not, I don't know, but you'd often see
mentioned a Mark Fletcher. Obviously Malcolm and Gregor Fletcher. Where's Mark here?
Well, I'm not too sure. I think there were brothers and sisters, but they lived down in Coolamurch, where we'll be looking at later on. But Mark is now here with his family, yes. But yeah, an important corner, I guess, for the Yean district, the cemetery, the hotel. What else do you need?
Lakes, wouldn't it?
Yes, Alicia?
Why was it actually pulled over or pulled down? Was it just so deteriorated, or
I guess
they couldn't save it?
possibly, yeah.
Oh, wasn't it Vic Roads widening?
Well, yes, they did widen. I don't know if it took much. Well, it obviously would have been close, but you can see where the part of the building has been. But amazingly, they kept the oak tree there on the corner. But yes, it was possibly due to some of that road widening that the house was.
And it's future road widening too, because of the entire of Plenty Road, the easement is actually there for duplication.
But that easement, as Barbara's saying there, I think they gazetted that way back in the 70s or something,
Yes.
and we're still waiting for the double road. Anyway, so unique site, but I encourage you to go away and try and find out a bit more about it yourselves, and let us know what you find.
Any idea when that photo was taken? Because that photo doesn't have any of those trees.
No.
And that's the corner, isn't it?
Yes, this is the corner, yes.
A pretty old one.
Very old.
Yeah, the fence is a bit unique, isn't it? You know,
Yes,
but-
nice.
Yeah,
Typical of its time.
yeah. But I'm sure there was lots of stories went on in that hotel. You know, this site could only talk.
Wouldn't it be good if it was still there, and the fact that you drive up to Wilson and you see this really historic kind of hotel before you even got into the township?
Yes, and we could even go in for a drink now. Yeah. That'd be better still.
A drink.
Yeah, that's right.
That was involved Tobin Brothers.
So, where you can see a roadside sign just ahead of us here, that's the crossing here in Cage Road of the railway line. So I'll just give you a bit of a short story on the railway if you're not familiar with the railway. So in 1853, as part of the Yean water supply project, a 19-mile long tramway was constructed adjacent to the route of the pipeline between Yean and Melbourne. At the conclusion of the project, the tramway was abandoned. However, a decade later, the expansion of the township of Whittlesea led to the Victorian government to consider reopening the tramway. Despite an 1866 Select Committee report supporting the scheme, it did not progress. While the plans to reopen the Yean tramway did not materialise, residents of the Whittlesea district used the opportunity to appear before the Select Committee to lobby for the construction of a railway line from North Fitzroy to the township of Whittlesea. In February 1867, following public meetings in the township of Whittlesea and at the Morang, Fitzroy, Preston and Epping, residents of the Upper Plenty sent a deputation to meet with parliamentary representatives to discuss the possibility of laying rail lines in between the tracks of the old timber tramway and using some of the existing infrastructure, for example bridges. The response was positive and a series of public meetings followed. In January 1869, a second deputation was sent to meet with the Minister of Railways. An engineer's report commissioned by the Minister revealed that the proposed route along the Yean tramway was inappropriate and that many of the bridges that would be used by the new railway were rotten and would need to be reconstructed. The report put an end in the short term to the proposals to construct the railway line, and it was another 20 years before the railway line was finally constructed. The railway line to the township of Whittlesea finally opened on the 21st December 1889, when 130 guards travelled to Whittlesea and attended a banquet in the town hall. That would have been a do and a half to go to. The official opening occurred 2 days later on the 23rd of December 1889. The opening of the railway line had a significant impact upon the economic and social character of the city of Whittlesea. The frequent services, there were 16 trains a day on weekdays and 6 on Sundays, made it substantially easier to carry produce from the township of Whittlesea and opened up new markets to farmers in the area. The relative ease with which the area could be reached encouraged further tourism and growth. a timber tramway operated between 1911 and 1926, which transported material from Flowerdale to the railhead at Whittlesea and thence to Melbourne. The growth of the road transport led to the gradual reduction in the use of the rural rail network by freight and passengers, and a line to Whittlesea beyond Epping closed in 1959. Now, I think when that did close, some of the Whittlesea people thought, no, we don't want it to close, we'll try and keep it going. So they sent a group of people down to the rail minister, I think, in town, and had a meeting with him and said, you know, we should be retaining our railway line, it's important for this, this and this. And the minister, fellow, the chairman of the railways, got up and said, well, just may I ask, how did you people get here this morning? And they said, oh, we came by car.
Absolutely correct.
So it blew them right out the water. So that was the end of the railway. So
Anybody here that's ridden on the train? Hands
yes, few on the train, yes. The motor rail, I think it was in later days. But I think the train crossed Plenty Road 7 times between here and South Nerang. So you're constantly going and putting your head out the window to see where the train was, you know.
There was also
Goods train, yes.
On the weekends, you had the ferreters train, and they'd come up there and there'd be all the people with ferret boxes, and on the way back on Sunday night there'd be all bags full of rabbits. And also Norma Welpton out of Glenvale, she said that she had people walking from the station out there to the old pine plantation around the school.
Yes.
That grew the best,
Yes.
psychedelic mushroom.
Yes.
So people would come up from Melbourne and walk out to
Guys, Mum just told me a little story.
Yes.
Right? And I think
Come on,
it's
Gwen.
a cute story. So her cousin used to ride the train
Yes.
and didn't want to get the train all dirty. This is how much respect people used to have. And so she used to leave her muddy boots on the railway crossing and then get on the train.
Oh, you're sweet.
Where have we gone wrong? Anyway, no further questions for this site and the rail crossing sites. Yes?
I was just going to make a comment.
Yes.
My mother told me that if they'd come back from Melbourne on the train, they could ask to stop at
You
the
could
road
ask the
here
driver
and
to
they'd
let
get on.
you out. That's right. That's right. Yes, oh yes, the service was tremendous, wasn't it? Yes, you just get on and off where you like.
And there's a sign in the toilet not to be used at the station.
Yes, yeah, for obvious reasons. But there's a lot that can be said about both of these sites, and as I say, I encourage you to go away and look up that information yourselves. Now here on the Turong Yean Aqueduct site. So I'll just read you a bit of a short story about this particular aqueduct here. Right, so the waters of the eastern branch of the Plenty and Jacks Creek, augmented by the Wallaby Aqueduct, are conveyed from the Turong Reservoir by the Yean Aqueduct. The floodgates, which we'll talk about over here, being permanently closed. The Turong and Yean Aqueduct is similar in design to the Wallaby Aqueduct, but larger. It is lined with pitches throughout. It is 4 3/4 miles long. So from here to Turong is 4 3/4 miles. 13 feet 6 inches wide and 4 feet 9 inches deep. So I hope us the oldies can relate to the Imperial a bit more, perhaps. Young ones amongst us mightn't. And a fall of 7 feet 6 inches per mile. So you can know how long a mile is as such. Well, you're only falling 7 feet in that mile. So there has been some tremendous engineering work done in order to get that gradient, and we'll talk about these drops here per mile. Its carrying capacity is 120 million gallons per day. In it are numerous drops, like this one here, or artificial waterfalls. The greatest being 17 feet deep, I think it's this one, or the one just to the. These drops, in addition to preserving the uniform grade in the channel, have a beneficial effect on the water. there is in this channel one short inverted siphon consisting of 36-inch cast iron pipes. So that is actually between Whittlesea and Toorong, that siphon. So that's going down a rather steep gradient, and they put pipes in rather than bring the water down the open channel. So I don't know a lot about the siphon. I think Lindsay's tried to research on the siphon himself, so I don't know if he's found anything there, but a rather unique engineering feat in order to get that water to drop down and come onto a lower level. The cost of the Toorong reservoir and the aqueduct was £77,808. So, in short of it, that aqueduct was constructed there. Initially the aqueduct commenced here, bringing the water from the Plenty River into this Yean aqueduct. You'll see this aqueduct here is much larger than this aqueduct, so it's larger again. So the Plenty water was coming in off those flats and catchment of the Plenty Valley up there to the north of us, coming in through the floodgates here. When that water turned murky and dirty, which it was more than often than wasn't, they could shut those gates and divert that water to continue along the Plenty River, so that they weren't putting dirty water into the reservoir. But the bulk of the time it was open to let that water flow into the reservoir. But with construction of the Whittlesea Township, the logging in the catchment, those sorts of things that were happening in early days, the river became very, very polluted, so they decided to do away with catching that Plenty River water that's coming through that built-up area. So they decided then to build this aqueduct in 1880 to Toorong. So it brought the water straight from the headworks of the Wallaby Creek system to the north of us, down to Toorong, down the channel and in here. And that's largely what this junction point is doing here. It's bringing that water into this larger channel here and then onto Yean. So as you can see, the engineering, getting these bluestone blocks here in place, you know, how do you lift these blocks in 1880? No front end loaders, no backhoes, no equipment of that nature. So a lot of labour intensive, hard work. Yes, yes, so it's all faced, of course, the channel's all faced with 9-inch bluestone blocks. But you might imagine how many bluestone blocks are between here and Toorong Reservoir. A hell of a lot. So that was just, sorry? Yes, all the way here. But as you can see, when I worked on the Border Works years ago along with Bruce, we used to clean this here, this channel. It was in, I must say, a better state of cleanliness than perhaps it might look today. None of this vegetation was growing in the channel. That water that's coming from Wallaby Creek now is not considered its primary, you know, means of getting water into the reservoir now. So they've got other means to do that. But yes, all these bluestone blocks going into the Yean Reservoir, and we'll follow the aqueduct along. You'll get glimpses of that as we go along in the bus. But yeah, look at the size of these stones, will you? You know, just how do you get these stones in place? A lot of hard work. Yeah, so anyway, but as I say, this floodgate construction over here, it's just a bit of a remnant part of the engineering now. Still hidden underneath the vegetation there, but you're welcome to go and have a bit of a look and see that for yourself. Yeah, so still an important part of our history. So we're fortunate we've still got it with us. So this is what we're calling Site 4 here. So we're talking a bit about Coolamert Homestead, which you can't particularly see it, but it's just through these trees here. There's a new building getting constructed there on the site. So I'll just talk a bit about Coolamert. So Coolamert Homestead, an 1893 map lists J. Finesse as the owner of the land upon which Coolamert stands, or I should say stood, till very recently. I came past here a few weeks ago and all there was the chimneys standing up, but we can see just through the trees here, they're putting another building on that site. So they've obviously decided the old homestead wasn't quite up to their liking, and they're putting a new building on the site. So that's the Coolamert homestead site. It was probably built by George Wilson, he being the Yean Reservoir caretaker from 1907 to 1923. George Wilson is believed to have married into the Finesse family and erected the house soon after. So we're talking of that period there. However, we do know that George married Minnie Cunningham, so he didn't actually marry a Finesse. So we just don't know how that's working. So, but and Minnie Cunningham and George Wilson, of course, they appear in the Big Pond production that the Woodlands players present at the Yean Cottage. So I'd encourage you to look out for that performance when it takes place. So that's a whole history story there again. An early map shows John Thomas Finesse owning land to the west of the Plenty River, extending towards the railway line, so it went out this direction. By 1880, Finesse was dead, his land in the hands of his executors and leased to James Maxwell. Now that name Maxwell is a very early name for the Plenty area. They are up here on Plenty Road, just next to the cemetery, that's right. So the old Maxwell house on this east side is no longer there. I remember that as a kid, an old low timber roof sort of a building, but the other house on the other side is still there, the brick house, joining the cemetery. Coolamert was rented out by numerous people over many years. In later years, Bob and Sylvia Child had moved from their home, the hotel site, and to Coolamert here. He'll be stopping, I think, yes. So, so the Bob and Sylvia Childs lived here. Now, we mentioned Sylvia Childs. She was our local character. And just one story I might mention about Sylvia. The Border Works, where I used to work here at Yean, we had a file on the Childs. It was about this thick, letters in and out. But anyway, one particular time, Sylvia Childs had an experience here on the channel with one of her calves. Bob and Sylvia used to get the channel out by themselves. So the board said, no, you need to be contacting the park office or the caretaker office in order to get assistance to do that. So this particular day, Sylvia rings up in a flurry, the calf's in the channel, can you come around and help us get it out? So anyway, myself and a couple of other guys went around, and Sylvia was one of those that she was Scandinavian, and she wore a hat and a coat and gloves and a dress and trousers and gumboots, and she was decked to the nines. And she'd wear all that going shopping to Whittlesea. But anyway, Sylvia and Bob, her husband, were here on the channel trying to coax this calf out of the channel, which at that time was a full channel. So you can imagine how much water is in that channel flowing from Toorong full speed. So Sylvia's actually leaning over the channel with a piece of grass. Come on Daisy, out you come. Well, the calf was that stressed it just, wasn't taking any notice of Sylvia. But anyway, she was leaning over, consequently she goes in the channel. So we're up above this drop here. So once again, it's another drop in the system. So there was no grating there, no safety barrier at those times. So we were just north of that drop, while Sylvia was like a cork in a bathtub. She would go down, she would go along, she'd come up and get a gulp of air, she'd go down, she'd go and come up with another gulp of air. So this is getting a bit serious by this point because we're heading for this drop. And myself and the other guys are running along the side, just debating what we're going to do here. Anyway, at that particular point, I could see something needed to be happening serious here. So I just managed to get hold of a big stick. And I reached out with this stick, and as Sylvia came up for a gulp of air, she saw the stick, she grabbed the stick, and I reefed her into the bank, and she clambered up the side, and the calf, I don't know where it went by this point, but anyway, she clambered up the side, and anyway, she says, I'm not wet, I never got wet, I'm not wet, I'm not wet. And she scrambled inside to the homestead, and we never saw her again. But after that, she always said, "Oh, Mr. McGavin, I remember you. You saved my life. You know, you did wonderful things. You saved my life." And I was always hopeful she was going to leave me the property or something, but that didn't happen. But anyway, she was a character, and we loved her. But yes, we had a file on her that thick. But she's very missed within the district. So she had that country character about her. So she's just one of the people that lived here in Coolamert. But it's a bit sad to see the homestead's gone, but this landscape here has changed dramatically. You know, you can look around you here and see some of these new buildings when we get down here. It's not the sleepy old Cades Lane dirt track that it may have been, so changing the times.
Sorry, but
Yes.
what is that over there?
That's a house and a sheds
And a shed? And
yes,
a,
yes.
And do they do anything? Do they produce anything?
No, that man's a plumber, got a
Oh,
plumbing
okay.
business.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excavations.
Yeah. Geez, it's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice.
But it's a lovely landscape around here, which we'll talk about in a moment. So we've now entered onto Dunnett's Road, leaving Cage Road, travelling along Dunnett's Road. So we're at a site number 5, calling it the target paddock. And we'll talk about just how that got its name. Ethel Duffy, in her book Reminiscence of Whittlesea, states the first church service held in Whittlesea was under a tree in what had been known as the target paddock, a large area of land adjoining Ryder's Swamp and now part of the Yean Reservoir. She also states John Finesse in 1856 purchased the target paddock and the land running to the Plenty River on the west side of the aqueduct, which I think we may have mentioned. Lindsay Mann, now where's Lindsay Mann? In his book, The Plenty Bush Ranges of 1842, states the desperadoes then camped the night in the bush a few hundred yards from Bear's homestead. Bear's homestead is over there. Perhaps this is the site where the bush rangers camped. We don't know. Maybe. The target paddock is now owned and managed by Melbourne Water. So why is it called the target paddock? The police and the army used the site, I believe, and rifle clubs to practice their shooting. So that's probably full of lead over there. So maybe. So there are other uses that have occurred, of course, with this site. Now, the most obvious one, if we think way back, would be the occupation of the Indigenous people here. What better site could you find for yourself to be hunting and gathering as this swamp here, natural swampland? So I guess they're the first inhabitants of this site. So I will also talk about the artists that used to come here and paint. Now the landscape here, as you can see, it's quite nice. So artists took that opportunity to come out here from particularly the Heidelberg School of Art in early days and paint the location. So we'll talk a bit about the landscape. The landscape of the city of Whittlesea has long been a source of inspiration for artists, and many of the earlier depictions of the city of Whittlesea emphasised its pastoral qualities, as well as the efforts of early settlers to improve the land. Photographs of the landscape photographer Fred Kruger provided an insight into the way that the landscape was understood. Kruger's idyllic depictions of life are firmly in the European tradition of pastoral romanticism. However, by the mid part of the 20th century, artists were focusing more upon the uniquely Australian landscape and its aspects. Within the city of Whittlesea, notable local painters from the mid and later parts of the 20th century included John Borwick, William Frater and Arnold Shaw. John Borwick in particular has a long association with the city of Whittlesea, his grandparents owning the Zeeble farmhouse at Thomastown, and has spent much of his career exploring landscapes in this area. Borwick considered the rich pastoral landscapes of the area to be the epitome of everything he had read within Australian literature and seen in many paintings, an unsullied extension of the rapidly developing landscape he had come to know around the Ivanhoe and Heidelberg, I think, areas. Borwick's descriptions of the landscape stress its unique Australian qualities. The dusty sky, the gum trees are significant features of his works. So there's, I think he has, as I mentioned, got works that he's done here along with those other early artists. The Whittlesea region has also a popular subject for several other significant artists. Fred Williams, John Percival and Clifton Pugh have all painted the landscape of the Plenty Valley. Clifton Pugh living in Cottlesbridge in the Shire of Nillumbik, close to its border with the city of Whittlesea. Fred Williams, John Percival also painted extensively at the Yean Swamp, and Percival produced some major works at the Cooks Road area in Mernda. Unlike Kruger or Borwick, these artists provide an impression of the landscape as much as the faithful depiction of it. Their aim was to convey how it felt as much as how it looked. Their representations changed along the way that the region and the Australian bush more generally was seen. So Fred Williams is featured in a work, The Trees in the Landscape, which is the picture of that here. So yeah, occupied and taken advantage of by the early artists, so which was pleasing to see. And we might recall that we had Plenty Valley Arts at our AGM last year, and one of the sites that they visited as part of their conference was this site here. So in 1996, I think it was. So there was a paper delivered on the actual site here at that conference. So there's more detail that can be found about the site if you care to look that up in some of those Plenty Valley Arts publications. So, but an idyllic setting, you might say, pretty much. You
John
can't.
Borwick still with us?
John Borwick, yes, yes.
He was our art teacher at Maryland's there.
Yeah.
We had numerous paintings of his, outside the headmaster's office there.
Yeah, so the Borwick collection is at the City of Whittlesea. Yeah,
And I think there's a publication you can buy at Zeeble Complex.
yes.
Now, what happens to, did they just bought by the Shire of Whittlesea?
No, they were handed by the family to.
So
Yeah, I believe so,
So
yes.
they're now responsible for
Yeah.
running it.
Oh, the site. Yes, they're responsible for
Yeah.
the site. Yes, but the artworks that John has painted of this particular site and others, they've been given to the City of Whittlesea, I believe.
Yeah,
Yes.
at their office.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you might have noticed when you came around the corner, the old fence posts here, which signified the entrance to the property here. So I think these are actually listed on the City of Whittlesea's conservation study, those posts. So yeah, but pretty much that's what you. But yeah, beautiful landscape. Mm. So do you have anything, Vance? Where are you to say about here? Is being
was,
local?
It's more about the actual farm itself.
Farm next door, right?
Because what you call the
silos.
the road here, the paddock here was in the 30s was called the rifle paddock.
Rifle paddock, yeah.
And yeah, they used to come out once a month and shoot at things.
Yeah.
I assume targets, not wombats.
Yes, there wouldn't have been a bird in sight, I'd say.
Yeah, not that they.
Rabbit. Yes. So.
Within range.
But yeah, natural setting pretty much. Left, I guess, one of maybe a few in the City of Whittlesea amongst us. So.
Well, that's what we've got to try and save
Mm.
and make sure that we keep these kind of areas.
Welcome to Castle Hill Farm, or Heatherley it was previously known as, or New Leicester Farm, whichever you like. So there's a number of names over a number of years. But I just want to acknowledge John and Tess Wilkinson this morning and Michael for hosting us here. Now, this is not the first occasion that we have visited Tess and John here and Michael. So here, Tess, you can look back on some old photos here of when we visited, I think in 96 or something it was. And that was part of a presentation that we did to John and Tess. Lindsay Mann produced this document about Castle Hill Farm and the vineyard. So we had an evening here to present John and Tess with this document. So that was a lot of research that Lindsay had put into researching the vineyard here and John Bear's time here. So, but we'll talk a bit about John Bear and those that came thereafter. But yeah, so John and Tess, you've been here for a number of years yourself now.
48.
48 years. You're just becoming a local. Right.
Never really become one.
Right. Yes. So yeah, we're very pleased to visit you, and we acknowledge your ability to let us be here this morning. So, but there's a mountain of history, as I say, that goes with this site here, and it's very difficult to present a mountain of history in 5 minutes. But I think the important part is we're here. We can have a look around. John and Tess will talk about some of the key features of the property and just what it was like when they came here, I guess. But we also have Vance here and his family that were here before John and Tess back in the 40s. What year did you come? 33. 30. So Bebbingtons, you're familiar with the name Bebbington, Tess and John? So, yes, that's
That's your
Arthur Road.
yes.
And that's fascinating. I've got some copies out for you to peruse if you wish. Because they were here for many years.
Yes, that's right. But there's been a number of, as I say, historical reports written on this site here, so there's a mountain of stuff you can plough through. But this document here, it relates to John Bear, who settled here in the 1840s. It's a bit extensive perhaps to read through, but perhaps when we're at the lunchroom at the caretaker's cottage, you might take the time to read that. But basically what it's outlining here is John Bear. He came from Devon in England in the early 1840s. Quite prosperous for his time. Businessman, astute businessman, came out to Melbourne by chartering his own vessel, the Brothers, and had his own cow and livestock on board. But this document here pretty much relates to the diary of John's son from day one when they left England, boarding that ship, and the endeavour it took to get here, stopping at Cape Town, I think, and talks a bit about what went on there before they landed here in Melbourne. They were quite pleased with Melbourne and the district when they got off the boat there. It was everything they'd been led to believe, so that was nice to hear, I guess. But Bear, early times, 41 I think it was, a bit before 41, he then come and bought this parcel of land here at Yean. So Yean, you can imagine in 1841 was way to the never nevers. It was miles away, of course, from Melbourne. So you just wonder why they, want to come out this far. But it was all about bettering yourself, of course, getting pastoral lands to run your stock and prosper, I guess. But this was one of only one property that Bear then later went on to purchase. Had a lot of country in the Serpentine and the Loddon area, up through Bort. Thousands and thousands of acres he had under lease and owned. So very astute businessman, as I say. But Castle Hill, I think, being his earliest points where he settled here, I think it was a bit close to the heart for him. But he established the homestead here, and I think, Tess, you might correct me, part of this building here might be the original part of the Bear construction. So this older section here, the timber section to the west of us was added, I think, sort of 1900 or thereabout, 1914. So, but of course, it's well over 100 years old in itself. That's the modern bit. That's the modern. That's right, just the modern bit. But yes, so they established themselves here with their family. Now Lindsay, of course, he's researched the Bear family and he's written the book, of course, The Bushrangers of the Plenty Valley, 1841. And those bushrangers, of course, held up the Bear family here. Mrs. Bear and the daughter. And so that story there is for you to look up and read all about, and just what went on with those bushrangers, how they threatened and held Mrs. Bear to ransom, I guess, and stole her gold watch and her sovereigns and the like. But of course the story then goes on to say that the posse from the Melbourne Club captured those bushrangers at West Lowlands, which is just to the north of Whittlesea here, and they were the first white people then to be hung in Melbourne. Prior to that, there was only Indigenous people that were being hung. But yeah, that's a very unique story, but I'd encourage you to look up Lindsay's book and get all those facts and figures. So yes, so there's that history with the site here, along with the vineyard. Bear then went on to establish the vineyard here, and later on his son Thomas Bear took over that and had some different managers come and go over the years. But that wine that was produced here was very unique for its time. I think it went across to the Paris exhibition in early days, and the French were saying that this wine that was produced in the colony here must have been French wine that had been rebottled. So how could they be producing wine of that quality? And I think even Queen Victoria had ordered wine from here. So she was drinking Castle Hill wine. So it must have been all right for the Queen to be drinking.
One of the best in the world.
That's right.
Uses a disinfectant.
Cleaning old pennies or whatever you like. But so yeah, as I mentioned on the buses, we crossed over the channel. The actual winery itself was located down on the channel there, closer to the river. So there's not a lot, I guess, left of that evidence of the winery here, but the story's there. So that's the important part. So
do we know how long it operated for?
A number of years. It sort of ebbed and flowed a bit, I think. As I mentioned, there was a number of managers that came along on the way to manage the property in the vineyard. But there is a very good story here. I don't know if any of you ever come across it. What's it called here? It's by Brunei, written. It's about his story of coming to landing, I think, at off the coast somewhere here, and he was served wine for the evening meal, and then he wanted to find out where this wine actually came from. So he then endeavoured to do that, and this story that's here is an encounter of how he got to be here on a particular day, how he found where this wine was growing, and meeting the manager here on site, because he just wanted to find out how this colony was producing this such excellent wine. So that's here. You can perhaps look over that at lunchtime if you care to read that. But a very unique story about his travels up the Plenty to come to this site here. So he must have thought it was a nice drop to be making that effort to do that. So that's all written here. You can look over that. So that's pretty much the Bear history, of course. They're still with us today, the Bears. They're actually coming to the Yean 170th celebration next week. So it's good to see the Bears are still interested in their family history, and so that's great to have them on board next week. So no
Ross,
doubt.
can I just mention that the Bears went on to establish the
Tabilk.
Yes.
And they took the vines from here to Chateau Tabilk.
Yes.
Yes. So as part of that document that I said Lindsay produced earlier, on that particular evening, we presented John and Tess with a grapevine, which I managed to dig up from the catchment here when I was working here at Yean years ago for the Board of Works. So I'd taken that grape and propagated it, and we presented John and Tess. Now I hope it's growing.
It didn't die. I'll show it around the corner.
So it's pleasing to think that that vine has actually come back to where it's sort of meant to be. So yeah, I've got one growing myself at home, but I have shown it to a wine expert, and he was wanting to actually get that off of me, but I didn't really want to pass it on. It's a different leaf to the normal grapevine we see of today. Sweet, but I like them.
It's just
It would be quite tiny.
Sweet.
Yes,
Yes, yeah.
full pips.
So, yes, I'm glad to hear that your vine's growing, Tess, yes.
There's a couple more connections to this area when it comes to the wine, because the first vineyard in Melbourne was at Elkington, and it had to do with Wills and Latrobe. Now Latrobe came, his wife came from Switzerland, from that French border town north of Geneva. He was very much into wine himself. He loved good wine. In fact, he organised a lot of the villages, wine dressers that came out that settled the Geelong area and the upper Yarra. So the first one was in Elkington, the next one was in Heidelberg, again on their properties, on their home mansions. And the Bear connection here with wine was around the same time, so it predates the Yarra Valley. And a lot of people that came, they were important people, brought vine cuttings with them.
Yeah.
And this is how they set them up. Very close to Melbourne as well as a little bit further out.
But I think in this diary that the son had written on his journey out here, it said they stopped at Cape Town, and that's where the Cape weed came from. The people were collecting up Cape weed over there, and it ended up here in Australia. So we've
But we wouldn't have daisy chains.
so that's where these things came, I guess, in the early days.
It came in hay, boss,
Hay, yes.
in a big drought. That's where it came from.
But now I might perhaps hand over to the Bebbington family, who we mentioned were here in the 30s and 40s. So Vance, if you've got anything to building,
John,
John.
can you just tell them what these buildings are? The
What-
killing
Oh, this was a cattle. Mr. Bebbington knows more. This was when they hand milked before milking machines came. And this one here is after they had the milking machines, they milked them in here.
Right. Yeah.
So you can have
And
it
the
right
old killing
inside
room
the
here.
cattle pavilion, if you will.
I think the grandfather
Still got the brains out.
So I don't know if you have something to say here about this side of the house. This a work in progress. But I'm pleased to see Tessa's nurturing that grapevine that we gave her all those years ago. And I think perhaps on our next visit it'll be over the top of the house.
Well, we're extending the pergola for it. You can see John started on the high.
But I think it's great that that vine has come back to where it's sort of meant to be. So, yes. So Vance, do you want to say anything? Where's Vance? Here he is behind me. Vance,
I'm standing in the background.
do you want to say something of your time here now in the early days? Go on.
Okay. Now, the farm here now known as Castle Hill, when my grandparents came here, it was called Hatherley, and before that, so we don't know where it changed or when it changed to. Now, our grandparents, Joseph and Edith Bebbington, owned it from 1934 and sold it in 1955, and it consists of 180 acres, 72 hectares for modern people, with an additional 76 acres being leased, and I'm fairly sure it actually went all the way down to Yean the foreshore. I don't know where that is. Now, 7 of the 10 children came to Hatherley with them, and the younger ones went to Whittlesey School. The eldest son, my father Bevis, and Kenneth, mainly worked away for most of the time, and they came here for the initial setup of the farm, and would return when they needed extra manpower for harvesting or if there were any problems. Now, all of the other children, ranging from littles to bigs, all worked here, the girls as well. And my father always reckoned that his second elder sister could outwork any man in the district. And by the end of the Second World War, 5 of the youngest kids were still here on the farm, still living here. Now, both my grandmother Edith, who died in 44, and grandfather Joseph died in 48, are buried in the former Whittlesey Cemetery, which is now known as the Yean Cemetery, alongside the second daughter, Dorothy, and one of her sons, Trevor. Another son, Kenneth, was buried in Palestine in World War II. He's noted on the grave, and there's a tree somewhere in Canberra, memorial tree somewhere in Whittlesey. Before the grandparents purchased the farm, it had several lots of types of farming, including dairy, vineyard, cropping. And already, when they bought 34, it already had a full complement of sheds. From the milking shed, horse stable, three wine processing, bottling and implement sheds. One of the first jobs they did after they moved here, although the wine plants were already here, they actually planted a bunch of fruit trees as well. Not so much for produce, but for a bit of food, bit of variety in the diet. So all the farms were here when all the buildings were pretty well here. They were all made out of good solid brick. As you can see, most of the buildings are back are high buildings, big double doors at each end. That was allow horses with a cart and a wagon to come through the shed, load or unload, keep going down the other end. Then nothing worse than trying to back a horse and things. As you see, there's a bit of a slope there because at the back it's more ground level. Up there it's about 4 foot off the ground.
So is that the original veranda? What's one there? Is that where they closed down the far corner there?
Yeah,
So that's the original
when you
veranda.
come up to the butchery, there was a building behind there which was probably a storage shed originally for stuff immediately for the house. Two of the boys slept in there where it was a shed. No roofs, basic bed. When my mother came out as a war bride in 46, father and mother lived in that house, and Dad actually did most of the brickwork up and split it up inside. There should be rooms inside it. Yeah, their parents lived there till my father bought his own farm a bit later on. We come past the rifle paddock, which is what it was called in those days. I'd actually never been here, and neither was my sister or my niece. Driven past it on the road, so this is a new surprise for me, all these buildings. And it's actually good to see how it translates from what's been written in the family history. So you'll have to bear with me if I'm not real sure where things are. But it sort of hopefully give you a bit of an idea what Heatherley was like and what it's turned into, what it was before. Because I think the history goes back to about 1880, doesn't it? When the Bears had it.
1840s, yes. Yeah, 40s, yeah.
But other than that, yeah.
So these silos, Vance, did your people build those?
They
or
were there.
They were there when you
34.
came here?
Pretty well all the like, I don't know about new buildings here, but pretty well all the old buildings were here in 34 when they come in. That's one of the reasons why they bought it, because it's a lot less work having to build it up.
Yes. I think Bear had sold part of the property, possibly the house, to like land speculators. I think Thomas Bent was one of them. I don't know if you're familiar with that name. He's got a statue in St Kilda somewhere. Brighton, is it? Yes. So he was one of those land speculators that Bear had sold it to. But they were going to do great strokes, I think, with development here, and it just never sort of progressed. So I think they might have went bankrupt or something. That
Yeah, because I think like in the 20s, somebody actually found that whoever bought it had found some old wine bottles. They did research and found out it had grapes on it, so they said two, but I don't know how long they lasted. There was a suggestion that a fella called Luxton.
He did. Luxton came. He was the manager or owner of McEwen's.
McPherson,
And
yes.
he built the weatherboard house.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because all the original buildings, I don't know how long they've been here, if they've been here for...
Could we assume that brickwork was one of the original buildings behind you over there? That brick area then goes to the weatherboards?
We say that was the butchery?
Yes.
Okay, so it's separate. The washdown walls are separate.
Yeah, because they used to
I have one question. Can you actually see anything from that turret kind of area?
The rotunda thing, I don't know.
We put that there because we joined the original brick farm, the 1850 building, with Luxton's weatherboard. There was a driveway through here where they moved the cows every day. And we joined the two up with this wooden structure, and we put the rotunda
pleasing to see that from an historical society point of view that John and Tess and Michael have a love for their property, you know, and they haven't, you know, bulldozed things or made any dramatic, you know, impacts to change the site. So yes, you've got to live here, of course, and work with that. But I know Tess is very passionate and John about the homestead here and the site. So that's what we like to see as an organisation, I think. So.
So hopefully people come in and knock it down.
Yeah. I sit down just give you a bit of a short talk about this particular building and where we are. So Yean Reservoir Caretaker's Cottage. So there's a mountain of history once again here to explore and know about. So very difficult to tell it all in 5 minutes. But I'll find a way. But I might add, Lindsay has been very, very helpful to me in my role here as a park ranger over the years in providing me with history and information. I only have had to ring up Lindsay and say, I've got a query on this or what about this, and he'd go off and delve and save me doing it, and he'd come back with the answers. So I'm always in debt to Lindsay. So.
I've forgotten all that now.
And you're the doctor. We'll so, okay, the Yean Caretaker's Cottage. So this is just a bit of a timeline in its history. I think I actually wrote this some time back to present to an audience here. But anyway, built between the years 1854 to 1856, the 4-roomed brick rendered section of this building was initially constructed as an office for the reservoir construction engineer, Matthew Bullock Jackson. And we can see Jackson's name engraved on the water tower that sits in the reservoir there. So he was quite proud of the project that he'd undertaken. So he decided to leave his name in that arch. So if you care to look at that building, you'll see his name. It is considered that Jackson was the design architect for the cottage. However, there is belief that James Blackburn, the reservoir's designer, also may have contributed to its construction. Now we know that Blackburn, he designed the Yean system in principle with a few modifications that took place. But of course Blackburn, he met with an accident and he wasn't quite the man he was initially. So I think the job was appointed to Bullock Jackson to oversee the construction of the reservoir. But he did have, Blackburn did have input, we believe, into the construction of this building, because he was, as I say, an engineer and architect, and a very clever man that was, earlier to coming here, he was a convict being sent to Tasmania, but the government over there decided they had a clever man on their books, so they put him to task building a lot of the bridges and things in Tasmania and buildings, so they're still standing today. But then when he came to Melbourne, of course, he decided he needed to do something with the water supply system, so we're left with his legacy. So, upon completion of the reservoir in 1857, the building was extended to accommodate the then resident caretaker and his family. A number of outbuildings have come and gone over time, including a standalone kitchen, laundry, beehive, well and office, here, an ornate garden comprising of extensive box hedging, azaleas, camellias, fan palms, and a summer house has also gone over time. So the caretaker that lived here, he had plenty of water, so he was able to squirt water day and night. So he had an extensive garden all around here. It was a bit of a show place. So that's long gone now. But notable long-time resident caretakers were the Wilson family, a father-son role covering a 70-year period. Now, like government jobs, once you got those, you didn't give them up. So the father-son, here they are up here. George and John Wilson. We mentioned Wilsons that owned the property around the road earlier on, but they were here for 70 years. And I'm pleased to say some of the Wilsons are returning next week for the celebration we're having next week. So it's good to have those people still a connection with the place here. So Jack Kerr took up the post in the 1920s and ending in the 1940s. I was fortunate to befriend Jack's son Doug. He provided me with wonderful stories and photographs of his childhood days here at the reservoir. Caretakers regarded their role as being of great importance. They endeavoured to oversee the harvest of water to its best quality and quantity before sending it on to Melbourne. Security of the closed catchment and the reservoirs was first and foremost in the mind of the caretaker. The caretaker's position was held in high regard throughout the community. The years rolled by for the cottage and its caretakers. Stories can be told of the impacts and effects of local, Australian and worldly events happening upon life here at Yean. The cottage continued to be the home of the resident caretaker and his family until the early 1970s, at which time a new residence was built. So that's up top here. The building of the new residence then saw the cottage vacant for some years before it was repurposed into a visitor centre. One of my first jobs upon starting with the MNDW in 1981 was laying the paths surrounding the cottage prior to its opening in 82. The cottage was opened daily by us caretaker staff, providing the visiting park user an insight into Melbourne's early and current water supply system. With the demise of the MNDW in 1991, ending a 100-year existence, and the then subsequent establishments of Melbourne Water, Melbourne Parks and Waterways and Parks Victoria, considerable change came about for the reservoir catchment, the park and the cottage. With staff now based at Plenty Gorge Park, the cottage was to become closed, open only by appointment. Infrequent use of the cottage was permitted to the Whittlesea Courthouse Association for their Bear Castle tours. And I'm pleased to say they're still happening, so they commence their tours at Whittlesea, go to the castle, come here for morning or afternoon tea and have a look through the building. So it's used in that sense. Over time, I came to consider this underutilised public asset to be a lazy asset. Endeavours to bring life and purpose to the cottage via a collaborative arrangement failed when I brought together representatives from Whittlesea Courthouse, Whittlesea Historical Society, Whittlesea City Council and Melbourne Water. The result of the meeting was Melbourne Water said they were not in the business of talking about their heritage. I'm happy to say that has changed because we're very fortunate we have Paul Balasoni with Melbourne Water now, who is, he's allowed us access to the channel there this morning, so we have a very good relationship with Paul. With budget restraints and changes in management, thinking the cottage and its precinct in more recent times does not mirror its former days. Let's hope we get to see that change. I must say the cottage has, however, regained some degree of life and purpose with the presence of the Woodland Players. This amateur drama group came on board to present their historical theatre production Big Pond. So that's staged here. The brief I gave Sue for the writing of this production was to deliver a performance that would highlight the significance of Yean Reservoir, which played in the development of Melbourne and how the reservoir is still very much significant today. She nailed it, and these performances are a sellout event. So some of you, of course, have been here to that performance, and I think, and even acted in it, I think.
Yes, that's right.
If we are to ask ourselves what value does this cottage, reservoir and its catchment hold for us, we need to look at what the term value means. I guess a dollar value can be determined, but cultural heritage value is something priceless. How do we put a value on the layers of people, their existence and what they have done and achieved here at Yean? This applies to both the Wurundjeri occupation of this site as well as its European occupation. History has seen considerable change for the cottage. What does the future hold for this heritage listed building and site? Perhaps we will see an extravaganza event to mark the 107th anniversary of Governor Latrobe turning the first site of construction of the Yean next year. Well, I'm happy to say that's happening next week. So those things do come to us that wait. And I finished off this speech by saying I welcome current management and cross-agency involvement and commitment along with community consultation and collaborative thinking to bring additional and varied uses of this building and site together. So that was just something that I've written. Yes, largely this was the office here for the engineer, Bullock Jackson, who sat there and looked over what was taking place, and then, as I say, then it became caretaker residence with those additional buildings outside. But it's seen a lot of history if these walls could talk. And the big pond performance that I mentioned, Sue Wright and her players conduct all this here with the audience here. And it's a day in the life of the Wilsons, set in 1879 or something, I think it is. So there's a whole drama goes around that particular day that took place here. I think it was,
Can I just interrupt?
yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, you're right.
But the play is referred to as an interpretive play. And the word that interpretive play means that the play is taking place on the place where the story is. So the lady who was playing Mrs. Wilson says to her husband, George, "Oh, George, look, I'm looking out now. You better go and check the levels of the reservoir." And so she looks out the window and there's the reservoir. So we're actually in the spot where the play is. It's called an interpretive play.
Yeah. I would very much have liked to have that play performed at some bigger locality. But as we're saying here, because you're on site, you get a real sense of where you are, and it just adds that other dimension to it. It's not up on some big stage that, it has no feeling for it. You're in the actual spot. So the whole story is set around Big Pond and just what took place with the Wilsons on that particular day. So yes, it's a very good way of interpreting that history. She nailed it, as I say, in getting that history told, just in this performance. So people go away with a better understanding of why it all came about and how it all works, who was here beforehand. So it's a great performance to look out for. So
how often does it happen?
they've sort of done some updates on it as the water system changed and the Maroondah and the Sylvan and the likes came into fashion. Sue has adapted the last couple of plays to bring in that side of the development of Melbourne's water system. So it's changing, which is good. So it's not the same old play going over and over, you might say. But it's sort of done when she gathers an audience and people sort of, but if you've got a group or something and you...
Could we organise a group through the Wilsey Historical Society?
Yes, yeah. But Sue will be here on next Sunday, and she is doing a performance here outside, so that will involve Governor Latrobe turning the first side. So we have Dr. Ronald here. And I think I might say I'm actually being promoted to the head of the water board. So
excellent!
After 40 years, I made it.
Right, so this place is actually heritage listed now, so no one could come along and just go, nah, we don't want it anymore, bang.
You look good.
Or is that me being naive?
I've been here long enough to say no, that will never happen. But yes, it is heritage listed. So it has a local council listing, of course, and it's on the heritage inventory. But no, it's to stay here. But
excellent.
But as I say, I think it is a bit of a lazy asset that could be used more often for a better purpose. But there are restraints with that use, so it's not an easy one to come up with some answers, but so I'm sure the answers are out there, but we just need to think a bit about that one. But so anyhow, if you haven't had a look through the cottage, by all means do so, or come back next week after 11 o'clock if you're not in the official part of the celebration next week. So when the reenactment is performed and some other activities happening. So the Historical Society have got a display here, a lot of photographs from early Yean times. So we've put all that together for viewing next week. But there will be a lot of family connection come back next week. The Bears, the Wilsons, all the Drapers and the Kerrs, and so it'll be a talk fest. So I just don't know how I'm going to control Q&A, but anyway.
What capacity is the reservoir used?
Sorry?
What what capacity is the reservoir used for?
Well, it's offline at the moment, I believe. They can fill this reservoir here now from waters from Sylvan and Maroondah. So 99.9% of that water is coming from across town to here. It's gravity fed. Sylvan is higher than here, so they gravity feed it. Doesn't cost anything to get it from A to B. The water we saw coming in via the channel, that is just a drop in the ocean to what the system is requiring. So yes, but it's offline, but you would have noticed the new buildings happening down the treatment plant and that, but that's all for the new pipeline going across to Bald Hills to provide that western development with water, because they haven't got enough water over there. So Yean still plays, after 1857, still playing an important role in getting that water to Melbourne and its suburbs.
So it looks like it's going to come back online.
Yes, it will come back online.
Yeah.
The water, I think, will go into the tank initially, but I think they're going to bring the reservoir itself back online to hold bigger capacity. And then send it through the treatment plant across to the suburbs.
This might seem like a really silly question. Okay.
You might get a silly answer.
I might. Hey, has it ever flooded?
The reservoir? Well, no, not.
Because you've got, I know you've got overflows
has been
like
floods,
most
yes,
stuff,
but if the caretaker's doing his job correctly and the like, if those levels are coming up, the water's coming in the channel as it used to, of course, in flood time, as you say. If there was too much that had been sent across, say, from the other suburbs, the reservoir comes up, well, you need to be letting it out before, or using it somewhere before it does get to that point. So there's a balance, there's a holding sort of a balance. So yeah, it's all about good management and getting that water.
But there is a spillway, isn't
there? There is a spillway, yes. The bywash is down here to the southern end of the embankment. So that is designed just to spill. I've only ever seen it spill over 2 or 3 times in my time, because it's not a good look wasting water.
No, not at all.
So
Sounds like
we used to spill it. We used to spill it out up where we crossed over. I don't know who was on our bus. We stopped. Both Bruce stopped too. Where that bywash.
Oh no, Mum, I've got my own private tour.
Oh yeah, you're separate. So where the channel was coming into the reservoir there, they can spill it out there by shutting those gates, so you don't get to see it going over there as such.
That's what I was inquiring.
Yeah, but yeah, it's all about trying to harvest as much water to the best quality you can to send it there to Melbourne.